Hey, this is Robert of Mayflower Bookshop, and I've got a little guitar here on my little cell phone. And I want to talk today about the Mahatma, the Mahatma letters. The Mahatma letters. Have you ever heard of that? The Mahatma letters. And you can, of course, get this book at the Theosophical Society or Mayflower Bookshop. Okay, I'll put that guitar down. And let's talk about the Mahatma letters. When Rudolf Steiner was, in the early days of him, you can see some esoteric school stuff where Rudolf Steiner says that when he speaks, and then he says, when you're listening to me speak, it's not me, it's the master so-and-so. And there was quite a thing with Blavatsky, who introduced the idea of masters of wisdom and compassion. Masters of wisdom and the harmony of feelings. Compassion, virtue. So the Mahatma Letters was a book that has these letters from the masters, and I want to read a little bit from there. It influenced Steiner, it influenced Manly Haw, it influenced a lot of people that there were such things as gurus, meaning from ignorance to wisdom or knowledge, from dark to light, from death to immortality. They have these wonderful, poetic, inspirational wisdom statements that one could, with their heart, interpret to manage your day and your life. So the Mahatma Letters. There was a time when there was but one faith, one rallying cry to save humanity from the miseries of ignorance in the name of Him who taught first the solidarity of all men. How is it now? The world has clouded the light of true knowledge, and selfishness will not allow its resurrection. The Mahatma Letters is really an amazing thing. And I want to read you a couple of things that I thought were pretty amazing, that caught me in the early days with this moment. And this book influenced a lot of Theosophists, and Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, that Steiner said Isis Unveiled was written by Christian Rosenkreuz through her hand. Okay, so the Mahatma Letters. And yet it is reconcilable for whomsoever will hold religiously to a strict analogy between the works of the two worlds, the visible and the invisible. One would, in fact, as one is working within itself, so to say. Now there must be failures in the ethereal races of the many classes of Diane Koans or Devas. Devas are like angels and Diane Koans are archangels, as well as failures among men. But still, as these failures are too far progressed and spiritualized to be thrown back forcibly from their Diane Kohanship into the vortex of a new primordial evolution through the lower kingdoms, this then happens. When a new solar system is to be evolved, these archangels, Dayan Koans, are, remember the Hindu allegory of the fallen devas or fallen angels, hurled by Shiva, into Andhra, who are allowed by Parabrahm to consider it as an intermediate state where they may prepare themselves by a series of rebirths in that sphere for a higher state. A new regeneration, born in by the influx ahead of the elementals, and remain as a latent or inactive spiritual force in the aura of the nascent world of a new system until the stage of human evolution is reached. Then karma has reached them and they will have to accept to the last drop in the bitter cup of retribution. I think you're talking about karma here and fallen angels and reincarnation until you're purified, right? Let's continue. Then they become an active force and commingle with the elementals or progressed entities of the pure animal kingdom to develop little by little the full type of humanity. In this commingling, they lose their high intelligence and spirituality of devaship to regain them in the end of the seventh ring in the seventh round. Thus we have first round, an ethereal being, non-intelligent, but super spiritual. In each of the subsequent races and sub-races and minor races of evolution, he grows more and more into an encased or incarnate being, but still predominantly ethereal. And like the animal and vegetable, he develops monstrous bodies correspondential with his coarse surroundings. Now again, this is a theory of Rudolf Steiner where he got it from the Mahatma letters and the secret doctrine by Blavatsky that there's 7 earths, and those are what we're calling the rounds. We're in the 4th round in our physical body. We're in the 4th earth. And in that 4th earth, there's 7 stages. We're now in the 5th stage of that. So in our minds, I believe that we're in a thinking manas level that we can attain. But then there's 7 within that 5th. And with our hearts, we're entering the 6th stage of the Aquarian age, you might say. So we talked about the first round as these ethereal, non-intelligent, but super spiritual beings that kind of were ethereal and get encased in animal and vegetable bodies with coarse surroundings. The second earth, or second round, what Steiner would call the sun, the Saturn into the sun, second earth. The second round, he is still gigantic and ethereal, but growing firmer and more condensed in body, a more physical man, yet still less intelligent than spiritual. For mind is a slower and more difficult evolution than the physical frame, and the mind would not develop as rapidly as the body. The third earth. Take a breath. We're getting through this. The Mahatma letters. Hardly anybody ever reads these things, by the way, so this is rare. The third earth, or the third round. He has now a perfectly concrete or compacted body, at first the form of a giant ape, and more intelligent, or rather cunning, than spiritual. For in the downward arc, he has now reached the point where his primordial spirituality is eclipsed or overshadowed by nascent mentality. In the last half of this third round, his gigantic stature decreases. His body improves in texture. Perhaps the microscope might help to demonstrate this. And he becomes a more rational being, though still more an ape than a deva, angel, man or woman. They're using that old way of speaking. But they mean, man is from, like woman is manas. Thinker. Thinking. Okay, the 4th earth and 4th round, of which we're just past the middle, and we made a turning point in time and we're ascending. The 4th round. Intellect has an enormous development in this round. The dumb races will acquire our human speech on our globe, on which from the 4th race language is perfected and knowledge in physical things increases. At this halfway point of the 4th round, humanity passes the axial point of the minor manvantaric circle. Moreover, at the middle point of every major or root race evolution of each round, man passes the equator of his course on the planet. The same rule applying to the whole evolution or the 7 rounds of the minor Manvantara or Manvantara. 7 rounds divided by 2 equals 3.5 rounds. At this point, then, the world teems with the results of intellectual activity and spiritual decrease. In the first half of the 4th race, sciences, arts, literature, and philosophy were born, eclipsed in one nation, reborn in another. Civilization and intellectual development whirling in septenary cycles as the rest, while it is but in the latter half that the spiritual ego will begin to its real struggle. It's in the latter half that the spiritual ego will begin its real struggle with body and mind to manifest its transcendental powers. Who will help in the forthcoming gigantic struggle? Who? Happy the man who helps a helping hand. Then there's the 5th round. The same relative development and the same struggle continues at a higher level. The 6th round, 7th round, and then they go on to speak again of this. Let's continue. Does every mineral form, vegetable, plant, animal always contain within it that entity which involves the potentiality of development into a planetary spirit? At this present day, in this present earth, is there such an essence or spirit or soul? The name is immaterial in every mineral and so on. So there's this descent and reascent that's talked a lot about. We kind of have it in our life when we're around 35 to 42, I suppose. But there are these, everything that has a beginning has a cyclic kind of going out from a new moon to a full moon and then coming back again. And in the Mahatma letters here at this place, they're talking about how Anna Kingsford confuses soul and spirit, refuses to discriminate between the animal and the spiritual ego, the Jivatma, Jive Atma, the Linga Shahira, and the Kama Rupa, or Atma Rupa. Kama Rupa is desire body, Atma Rupa is spirit body. The two as different things as body and mind and thought are. That is what happens. After circling, so to say, along the arc of the cycle, circling along and within it, the daily and yearly rotation of the earth is as good an illustration as any. When the spirit man, a term, by the way, Steiner uses, he replaced Atma with the word spirit man, and that comes from the Mahatma letters. Consciousness soul comes from the secret doctrine. All the terms that Mr. Steiner uses, Dr. Steiner. Consciousness soul, sentient soul. Yeah, Atma Buddha Manas is spirit self, life spirit, spirit man. This comes from the secret doctrine, and it comes from the Mahatma letters, right here. When the spirit man reaches our planet, which is one of the lowest, having lost at every station some of the ethereal and acquired an increase of material nature, both spirit and matter have become pretty much equilibrized in him. But then he has the earth cycle to perform. And as in the process of involution and evolution downward, matter is ever striving to stifle spirit. When arrived to the lowest point of his pilgrimage, the once pure planetary spirit will be found dwindled to what science agrees to call a primitive or primordial man, amidst a nature as primordial. Speaking geologically, for physical nature keeps pace with the physiological as well as the spiritual man in her cyclic career. At that point, the great law begins its work of selection. Matter found entirely divorced from spirit is thrown over into the still lower worlds, into the sixth gate or way of rebirth, of the vegetable and mineral kingdoms, and of the primitive animal forms. From thence, matter ground over in the workshop of nature proceeds soulless, back to its mother fount, while the egos, purified of their dross, are enabled to resume their progress once more onward. It is here, then, that the laggard egos perish by the millions. It is the solemn moment of the survival of the fittest, the annihilation of those unfit. It is but matter or material man which is compelled by its own weight to descend to the very bottom of the circle of necessity. That must be the wheel of samsara, the wheel of karma trying to find dharma. The very bottom of the circle of necessity, to there assume animal form, as to the winner of that race throughout the worlds, the spiritual ego. He or she will ascend from star to star, from one world to another, circling onward to re-become the once pure planetary spirit, then higher still to finally reach its first starting point, and from thence to merge into mystery. No adept has ever penetrated beyond the veil of primitive cosmic matter. The highest, the most perfect vision is limited to the universe of form and matter. But my explanation does not end here. You want to know why it is deemed supremely difficult, if not utterly impossible, for pure disembodied spirits to communicate with men through mediums. I say because on account of the antagonistic atmospheres respectively surrounding these worlds, of the entire dissimilarity of physiological and spiritual conditions, and because the chain of worlds I've just been telling you about is not only in epicycloid, I can't even say this, epicycloid, but an ecliptical orbit of existences having as every ellipse not one but 2 points, two foci, which can never approach each other, man being at one focus of it and pure spirit at the other. To this you might object. I can neither help it nor change the fact that there is still another and far mightier impediment, like a rosary composed of white and black beads alternating with each other, so that the concatenation of worlds is made up of worlds of causes and worlds of effects. The latter, the direct result produced by the former. Thus it becomes evident that every sphere of causes and our earth is one, is not only interlinked with and surrounded by, but actually separated from its nearest neighbor, the higher sphere of causality, by an impenetrable atmosphere in its spiritual sense of effects bordering on and even interlinking, never mixing with the next sphere. For one is active, the other passive, the world of causes positive, that of effects negative. This passive resistance can be overcome, but under conditions of which your most learned spiritualists have not the faintest idea. All movement is, to say, polar. It is very difficult to convey any meaning to you at this point, but I will go to the end. I am aware of my failure to bring before you these, to us, axiomatical truths, these true axioms. In any other form but that of a simple logical postulate. If so much, they being capable of absolute and unequivocal demonstration, but to the highest seers. But I'll give you food for thinking, if nothing else. The intermediary spheres, being but the projected shadows of the worlds of causes, are negatived by the last. They are the great halting places, the stations in which the new self-conscious egos, to be, the self-begotten progeny of the old and disembodied egos of our planet, are gestated. Before the new phoenix, reborn of the ashes of its parents, can soar higher to a better, more spiritual and perfect world, still a world of matter. It has to pass through the process of a new birth, so to say, and as on our earth, where the 2/3 of infants are either stillborn or die in infancy, so in our world of effects. On earth, it is the physiological and mental defects, the sins of the progenitors, which are visited upon the issue. In that land of shadows, the new and yet unconscious ego fetus becomes the just victim of the transgressions of its old self, whose karma, merit and demerit, will alone weave out its future destiny. In that world, my good friend, we find but unconscious self-acting ex-human machines, souls in their transition state, whose dormant faculties and individuality lie as a butterfly in its chrysalis, and spiritualists would yet have them talk sense. Caught at times into the vortex of the abnormal mediumistic currents, they become the unconscious echoes of thoughts and ideas crystallized around those present. Yeah, Theosophy is pretty down on mediumism and channeling. They go along with the Neoplatonists, Iamblichus, and so on, that the ultimate magic and theurgy is to invoke your higher self. That's the ultimate. And the notions of hells and purgatory, of paradises and resurrections, are all caricatured, distorted echoes of the primeval one truth, taught humanity in the infancy of its races by every first messenger, the planetary spirit mentioned on the reverse of page, the third, and whose remembrance lingered in the memory of men as Ilu of the Chaldees, Osiris of the Egyptian, Vishnu, the first Buddhas, and so on. The lower world of effects is a sphere of such distorted thoughts, of the most sensual conceptions and pictures of anthropomorphic deities, the out-creations of their creators, the sensual human minds of people who have never outgrown their brutehood on earth. Remembering thoughts are things, have tenacity, coherence in life, that they are real entities. The rest will become plain. Disembodied, the Creator is attracted naturally to its creation and creatures, sucked in by the maelstrom dug out by his own hands. But I must pause, for volumes would hardly suffice to explain all that was said by me in this letter. Truth is one and cannot admit of diametrically opposite views. The pure spirits who see it as it is, with the veil of matter entirely withdrawn from it, cannot err. Yeah, the Mahatma letters here, they go into some pretty wild, the cycles of and pilgrimages from star to star, skandhas and karma, the earth walkers versus this, which are the shells, and the sky walkers. Blavatsky talks about in The Voice of Silence much before Star Wars refers to skywalkers. She talks about the bottomless pit. Mahatma letters here. In the last and next chain from the earth, planets and other solar systems, the 7 degrees of initiation, that there's no intercourse in devachan or heaven. And Nirvana's past that. Personal ego or astral monad never reign. A big thing on the 6 and 7. I might get into a little bit here. In the Mahatma letters, page 57. They're talking about the blind law of necessity and the eternal fitness of things, and hence cannot be called evil in nature. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence, and its origin rests entirely with reasoning man who dissociates himself from nature. Humanity, yeah, we're killing Mother Nature. We definitely dissociate it. We pretend that we like it to run over it. Okay, so the real evil, Mahatma letters, the real evil, they're pretty hard here. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence, and its origin rests entirely with reasoning man who dissociates himself from nature. Humanity then alone is the true source of evil. Evil is the exaggeration of good, the progeny of human selfishness and greediness. Think profoundly, and you will find that save death, which is no evil but a necessary law, and accidents which will always find their reward in a future life, the origin of every evil, whether small or great, is in human action, in man whose intelligence makes him the one free agent in nature. It is not nature that creates diseases, but man. The latter's mission and destiny in the economy of nature is to die his natural death brought by old age, save accident. Neither a savage nor a wild, free animal die of disease. Food, sexual relations, drink are all natural necessities of life, yet excess in them brings on disease, misery, suffering, mental and physical, and the latter are transmitted as the greatest evils to future generations, the progeny of the culprits. Ambition, the desire of securing happiness and comfort for those we love, by obtaining honors and riches, are praiseworthy natural feelings. But when they transform man into an ambitious, cruel tyrant, a miser, a selfish egotist, they bring untold misery on those around him, on nations as well as on individuals. All this then, food, wealth, ambition, and 1,000 other things, we have to leave unmentioned, becomes a source and cause of evil, whether in its abundance or through its absence. Become a glutton, a debauchery, a tyrant, and you become the originator of diseases, of human suffering and misery. Lack all this and you starve. You are despised and a nobody, and the majority of the herd, your fellow men, make of you a sufferer of your own life. Therefore it is neither nature nor an imaginary deity that has to be blamed, but human nature made vile by selfishness. Think well over these words. Work out every cause of evil you can think of and trace it to its origin, and you will have solved 1/3 of the problem of evil. And now, after making due allowance for evils that are natural and cannot be avoided, and so few are they that I challenge the whole host of Western metaphysicians to call them evils or to trace them directly to an independent cause. I will point out the greatest, the chief cause of nearly 2/3 of the evils that pursue humanity ever since that cause became a power. It is religion. It is religion under whatever form and whatsoever nation. It is religion under whatever form and in whatsoever nation. It is the sacerdotal caste, the priesthood, and the churches. It is in those illusions that man looks upon as sacred that he has to search out the source of that multitude of evils, which is the great curse of humanity, and that almost overwhelms mankind. Ignorance created gods, and cunning took advantage of the opportunity. Ignorance created gods, and cunning took advantage of the opportunity. Look at India and look at Christendom and Islam, at Judaism and fetishism. It is priestly imposture that rendered these gods so terrible to man. It is religion that makes of him the selfish bigot, the fanatic that hates all mankind out of his own sect without rendering him any better or more moral for it. It is belief in God and gods that makes 2/3 of humanity the slaves of a handful of those who deceive them under the false pretense of saving them. Hello, Christopher Hitchens. Did you read this? I remember talking to Christopher Hitchens, and I was going over a lot of Theosophy and Steiner and Blavatsky and Tibetan Buddhism. And he claimed he was an atheist, but I think that his God was, was love, I think, in family and friends, conversations, golden conversations. Okay, back to the Mahatma letters here, pretty tough words they have here. It is a belief in God and gods that makes 2/3 of humanity the slaves of a handful of those who deceive them under the false pretense of saving them. Whoa. It is belief in God and gods that makes 2/3 of humanity the slaves of a handful of those who deceive them under the false pretense of saving them. Is not man ever ready to commit any kind of evil if told that his God or gods demand the crime? Voluntary victim of an illusionary God, the abject slave of his crafty ministers. The Irish, Italian, and Slavonian peasant will starve himself and see his family starving and naked to feed and clothe his padre and pope. For 2,000 years, India groaned under the weight of caste, Brahmins alone feeding on the fat of the land, and today the followers of Christ and those of Muhammad are cutting each other's throats in the names of and for the greater glory of their respective myths. Remember, the sum of human misery will never be diminished unto that day when the better portion of humanity destroys, in the name of truth, morality, and universal charity, the altars of their false gods. Wow. This book, it sounds like it's talking about today, but this book was written between the years 1880 and 1884. Wow. First published in 1923, but written in 1880, 1884. And leading newspapers of the British and British India by two Mahatmas whom H.P. Blavatsky had acknowledged as her teachers and inspirers of her Isis Unveiled and a Secret Doctrine. These original manuscripts were signed by M and K.H., are now housed in the British Museum. Treating in detail cosmology and the life and development of the human race. We're all running from something or to something. And this idea of race is cycles. It's just words that people misuse and misinterpret. These unusual communications reveal not only far-reaching concepts of religion and science and thought, since this time proven to be somewhat prophetic at times, but it has deep practicality, a warmth of heart, and a ripeness of humor. Many existing but fictitious ideas created by the fanciful imagination of would-be occultists are exploded by the very sound and human approach to natural law, and serious thinkers are not content with orthodoxy will find a more satisfying explanation of the foundation truths underlying the great religions. Yeah, we used to make a joke at Mayflower Bookshop that after you read the Mahatma letters and you start reading this modern Ascended Master stuff, that it seems like the Ascended Masters got dumber. This stuff's pretty deep and pretty smart. So let's continue where I left off. Remember, the sum of human misery will never be diminished unto the day when the better portion of humanity destroys, in the name of truth, morality, and universal charity, the altars of their false gods. If it is objected that we too have temples, we too have priests, and that our lamas also live on charity, Let them know that the objects above named have in common with their Western equivalents but the name. Thus, in our temples, there is neither a god nor gods worshipped, only the thrice sacred memory of the greatest as the holiest man that ever lived. If our lamas, to honor the fraternity of the bhikkhus, established by their blessed master himself, go out to be fed by the laity, the latter often to the number of 5 to 25,000 is fed and taken care of by the sangha, the fraternity of Lamic monks. The lamasery providing for the wants of the poor, the sick, the afflicted. Our lamas accept food, never money. But it is in those temples that the origin of evil is preached and impressed upon the people. There they are taught the Four Noble Truths, Arya Saka, and the chain of causation, the 12 Nidanas, gives them a solution of the problem of the origin and destruction of suffering. The Four Noble Truths, all existence is suffering, desire is the cause of suffering, cease desire, you cease suffering, and then the eightfold path of like right thinking and right livelihood and right speech and right action, Read the Mahavajja, read the Mahavagga, and try to understand not with the prejudiced Western mind, but the spirit of intuition and truth, what the fully enlightened one says in this first Khandaka. Allow me to translate it for you. At the time the Blessed Buddha was at Uruvela on the shores of the river Nirvana, as he rested under the Bodhi tree of wisdom after he had become Sambuddha. At the end of the seventh day, having his mind fixed on the chain of causation, he spoke thus: From ignorance spring the samkaras of threefold nature, production of body, of speech, of thought. From the samkaras springs consciousness. From consciousness springs name and form. From this spring the 6 regions of the 6 senses, the 7th being the property of but the enlightened. From these springs contact, from this sensation. From this springs thirst or desire, kama, tanya. From thirst, attachment, existence, birth, old age, and death, grief, lamentation, suffering, dejection, and despair. Again, by the destruction of ignorance, the sankharas are destroyed, and their consciousness, name, and form, the 6 regions, contact, sensation, thirst, attachment, selfishness, existence, birth, old age, death, grief, lamentation, suffering, dejection, and despair are destroyed. Such is the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. Knowing this, the Blessed One uttered this solemn utterance: when the real nature of things becomes clear to the meditating bhikshu, then all his doubts fade away, since he has learned what is that nature and what its cause. From ignorance spring all the evils. From knowledge comes the cessation of this mass of misery, and then the meditating brahmanas, right, stands dispelling the hosts of Mara like the sun that illuminates the sky. Meditation here means the superhuman, not supernatural, qualities or arhatship, in its highest of spiritual powers. Important to notice, from ignorance spring the samkaras of the threefold nature, productions of body, of speech, thought. From the samkaras springs consciousness. From consciousness springs name and form. From this spring the 6 regions of the 6 senses, the 7th being the property of but the enlightened. And this is like the 6-point star. It's like the spirit and matter. It's like the thinking, feeling, and willing, and the physical, emotional, mental, like 2 interlaced triangles. It's like the body, speech, and mind with the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as the higher trinity. But actually, there's a stillness within each one of us. And all that being said, there's a stillness within each one of us. And that stillness can digest your whole experience and free you from all form and recreate the form. That stillness is the door to our spirit self, our true nature. It's the door to God. And Sophia is her name. She's the stillness of God. So I probably said too much right there. Sophia is the wisdom of all things. And she's consort and harmony and in concert with, for lack of better words, deity, what people call God. So this Mahatma letters, they talk about the shields of the adepts, the law of balance, the TSCO, the Theosophical seal, is an interlaced triangle with an ankh at the center and a serpent, kind of a wise as serpent thing, circling the whole thing with an Om at the top. There's an Om, a circle, and within the circle is the interlaced triangles, which is really like a cube, isn't it? The interlaced triangles are a cube. In my tarot book coming, I talk about the triangle and the cube, or the Solomon seal, interlaced triangles, hexagon, and the circle and cross as a spirit soul body. You could meditate on that. They talk about in the Mahatma letters, love and hate, the only immortal quality. I remember talking about the Gelek Rinpoche about the Mahatma letters, and are there Mahatmas? At one point he really got into it, and Howard Weingarten was completely convinced that Gelek Rinpoche was a Mahatma. And Gelek Rinpoche did crazy wisdom on him and tricked him and teased him, and then Howard decided that he wasn't. But, first there is the mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. From the Mahatma letters, except insofar that he constantly uses the term God and Christ, which taken in their esoteric sense simply mean good. Good, true, beautiful, probably, eh? With Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Good. In its dual aspect of the abstract and the concrete, and nothing more dogmatic, Eliphas Levi is not in any... He wrote the book Transcendental Magic. They're talking about it here in the Mahatma letters. Eliphas Levi is not in any direct conflict with our teachings. It is again a straw blown out of a haystack and accused by the wind to belong to a haystack, or a hayrick. Most of those, whom you may call, if you like, candidates for devachan, die and are reborn in the Kamaloka, the desire realm, without remembrance, though and just because they do not get some of it back in the devachan, or heaven, nor can we call it a full but only a partial remembrance. You would hardly call remembrance a dream of yours, some particular scene or scenes within whose narrow limits you would find enclosed a few persons, those whom you loved best, with an undying love, that holy feeling that alone survives, and not the slightest recollection of any other events or scenes. Love and hatred are the only immortal feelings, the only survivors from the wreck of Ye Dhamma, or the phenomenal world. Imagine yourself, then, in devachan, with those you may have loved, with such immortal love, with the familiar shadowy scenes connected with them for a background and a perfect blank for everything else relating to your interior social, political, literary, and social life. And then in the face of that spiritual, purely cognitive existence, of that unalloyed felicity, which in proportion with the intensity of the feelings that created it lasts for a few to several thousand years, call it the personal reminiscence of yourself, if you can. Dreadfully monotonous, you may think. Not in the least, I answer. Have you experienced monotony during, say, that moment which you considered then and now to so consider it, at the moment of the highest bliss you have ever felt? Of course not. Well, no more will you experience it there in that passage through eternity in which a million of years is no longer than a second. He's talking about from death to rebirth, eh? There, where there is no consciousness of an external world, there can be no discernment to mark differences, hence no perception of contrasts monotony, or variety. Nothing, in short, outside that immortal feeling of love and sympathetic attraction, whose seeds are planted in the fifth, whose plants blossom luxuriantly in and around the fourth, but whose roots have to penetrate deep into the sixth principle, the Buddha, right? The life spirit, if it would survive the lower groups. And now I propose to kill 2/3 with one stone to answer yours and Mr. Hume's questions at the same time. Remember both that we create ourselves, our devachan heaven, as our avicii hell while on earth, and mostly during the latter days, and even moments of our intellectual, sentient lives. That feeling which is the strongest in us at the supreme hour, when, as it is in a dream, the events of a long life, to their minutest details, are marshaled in the greatest order in a few seconds in our vision. That vision takes place when a person is already proclaimed dead. The brain is the last organ that dies, the intelligence of the heart, I think. But there's some kind of brain in the etheric, an astro, an ego, that goes beyond the physical. That feeling will become the fashioner of our bliss or woe, that last moment. Will become the fashioner of our bliss or woe, the life principle of our future existence. In the latter, we have no substantial being, but only a present and momentary existence, whose duration has no bearing upon, as no effect or relation to its being, which, as every other effect of a transitory cause, will be as fleeting, and in its turn will vanish and cease to be. The real full remembrance of our lives will come but at the end of the minor cycle, not before. In Kamaloka, those who retain their remembrance will not enjoy it at the supreme hour of recollection. Those who know they are dead in their physical bodies can only be either adepts or sorcerers, and these two are the exceptions to the general rule. Both having been co-workers with nature, the former for good, the latter for bad, in her work of creation and in that of destruction. They are the only ones who may be called immortal in the Kabbalistic and in the esoteric sense, of course. Complete or true immortality, which means an unlimited sentient existence, can have no breaks or stoppages, no arrest of self-consciousness. And even the shells of those good men whose page will not be found missing in the great book of lives is the threshold of the great Nirvana. Even they will regain their remembrance and an appearance of self-consciousness only after the sixth and seventh principles, with the essence of the fifth, the latter having to furnish the material for even that partial recollection of personality, which is necessary for the object of devachan, heaven realm. In other words, the manas, or the thinking, the higher mind, goes with the Buddhic and Atma, the universal love and truth, right? Which is necessary to the object of devachan, have gone to their gestation period, not before. Even in the case of suicides and those who have perished by violent death, even in their case, consciousness requires a certain time to establish its new center of gravity and evolve, as Sir W. Hamilton would have it, its perception proper. Henceforth, to remain distinct from sensation proper. Thus, when man dies, his soul, fifth principle, becomes unconscious and loses all remembrance. The ego loses all remembrance of things internal as well as external. Whether his stay in Kamaloka has to last but a few moments, hours, days, weeks, months, or years, whether he died a natural or a violent death, whether it occurred in his young or old age, and whether the ego was good, bad, or indifferent, his consciousness leaves him as suddenly as the flame leaves the wick when blown out. When life has retired from the last particle in the brain matter, his perceptive faculties become extinct forever. His spiritual powers of cognition and volition, of those faculties, in short, which are neither inherent in nor acquirable by organic matter, for the time being. His mayavi rupa, may be often thrown into objectivity, as in the cases of apparitions after death. So they go on to this, and he goes on to say, the word immortality has for the initiates and occultists quite a different meaning. We call it immortal, but the one life in its universal collectivity and entire or absolute abstraction, that which has neither beginning nor end, nor any break in its continuity. So, again, it's part of the study in Key to Theosophy by Blavatsky, in the study of The Road to Self-Knowledge by Steiner, An Outline of Occult Science by Steiner, and in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, here in the Mahatma letters, is a slow but sure discernment of what is immortal and what's mortal and temporal. And can we make the immortal part of us conscious? Can we share consciously in that immortality? And that is part of the secret of secrets, is the silence that can receive this kind of information. And how they talk about in the Mahatma letters how pride blocks knowledge and egotism blocks spirituality. And arrogance is the ignorance hiding in fear, from fear. This is Robert Thibodeau of Mayflower Bookshop sharing profoundly deep Mahatma. Mahatma has like the hat with Mama with a hat, the Mama hat letters, the Mahatma letters by Sinet, which influenced Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine and even Rudolf Steiner in the contents of the Esoteric School, these early books, has quite a lot to say about the Mahatmas. And a recent book by Prokofiev on the Masters of Wisdom and Compassion. There's a little bit of disagreement. I mean, Steiner, they don't disagree, but they have some of them are different masters. I mean, Rudolf Steiner really makes a big thing of Christian Rosenkreuz, which Blavatsky goes into quite a bit here and there, and Michael. So there's kind of a relationship like in M and KH. There's usually this kind of duality of one master is more cosmic and one master is more earthly wisdom, and that the human being is what brings us together. And that's what we're trying to do. It's the heart that shares in the thinking and shares in the metabolic will, the primordial will from the great universe. The oneness of the Father comes into the lower and meets the heart. And the cosmological thinking of the universe comes into the head. And the heart kind of finds the equilibrium between earth and heaven, as above, so below, on earth as is in heaven. And so all these studies, I think, you may not get it all, but it's kind of fun, and it's really good spiritual work to go through this a bit and ponder. Rudolf Steiner says that in trying to understand spiritual knowledge, higher knowledge, we create the supersensible organs of perception. Blavatsky makes a big thing about the stillness and space. What is, was, and always will be. Isis, right? You might think. And she says space. And Steiner says we have to bring Isis back, who was stolen by the Luciferic forces, into abstract space and bring Isis back into livingness space, I think. So this is the awakened space. The difference between me and Buddha is that Buddha's space is awakened and mine's working on it. So bless your heart, and may we continue learning together until the whole earth is enlightened. May we be friends. This is Robert of MayflowerBookshop.com. Bless you.